I didn't hear the accusation at first. I heard the laughter. It came first, soft as silk, bright as knives, under the palace lamps of our failing little court. The kind of laughter that always arrived a heartbeat before someone decided your life was entertainment. I stood between two columns with my hands stained from honest work, herbs and salves and cloth pressed into my palms. My brother's fever had broken the night before. I should have been proud, quiet proud, the way a person is when they've saved someone they love. Then Mara Hollis stepped forward, wearing my brother's name like a ribbon. She didn't have to raise her voice. She never did. People leaned toward her as if gravity lived in her cheekbones. Her eyes slid over the bruise blooming along my rib and the tremor in my fingers from sleepless hours. She watched me like she was choosing which part of me to cut first. When she spoke, the court listened. That was the trick. I'd been raised to believe words mattered. That truth carried weight. In that hall, truth was just another thing you could starve until it disappeared. They said I'd stolen. They said I'd poisoned the royal kennel master's daughter. They said the missing charm from the old shrine had been found tucked into my satchel. They said my brother had screamed because the curse reached him first, because I'd meant for him to suffer. The guards dragged the satchel from beneath a bench as though it had been waiting all day for my hands to fail. I remember the exact shade of the lamp flame. I remember how every shadow seemed to point at me. When the accusation landed, it didn't just break me, it erased me. Because the court had already decided who I was. Broken servant, convenient villain, a woman you could throw away without consequence. I tried to speak. I really did. My throat tightened like a fist around my voice, but I pulled the words up anyway. Slow, careful, like lifting water with bare hands. I didn't... Mara smiled like I'd given her permission. Then where is the charm? She asked, and the room answered before I could. A dozen eyes flashed to the satchel. A handful of people stepped back, as if the accusation itself carried heat. My brother, his fever gone, his face pale, his eyes too bright, stood behind them all. He looked at me once and I saw it. Not belief, not even fear. Helplessness. His gaze said, "I'm trapped." Then Mara moved, close enough that her perfume hit my lungs. "You should learn when to stop," she murmured. "The beast in you doesn't care about reasons." The words struck wrong. Beast in you. I'd never told anyone about the way my body sometimes warmed without warning, the way I could feel the pulse of animals in the yard like a second heartbeat. I'd never told them how, when I was young, a wounded hawk had come to my palm as if it recognized something ancient. But Mara always seemed to know the secrets people tried to bury. They sentenced me the way you bury a problem. They called it justice. They called it purity. They stripped me of my name and tied it to my fault. They shoved me into a cell with damp stone and a thin blanket that smelled like old sweat. Hours crawled. My brother's silhouette appeared in the corridor once, then vanished again as guards shifted. No one came with a key. No one came with mercy. Eventually, the cell door opened, not for the kind of mercy that changes fate, for the kind that changes where you belong. A rider waited outside the bars with a cloak too dark to be cloth and too heavy to be just fabric. His eyes looked like sharpened amber. When he looked at me, I felt the air itself become attentive. "What is she?" he asked. A guard answered too quickly. "Thief, poisoner, curse carrier." The rider didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He watched my hands instead, the way my fingers flexed around the memory of a knife handle I hadn't used in days. He leaned in as the cell bars groaned. "Hold still," he said. Hold still. Like I was an object, like I was already broken enough. But I'd survived the hall. I'd survived the sentence. I'd survived being treated like a stain. Survival does something to you. It teaches you the difference between pain and power. So when they yanked me from the cell, I didn't stumble. I didn't beg. I didn't plead for a judge who'd already chosen. I walked. And when they shoved me into a wagon that reeked of dust and fear, I stared at the horizon until my eyes burned. We traveled through forests where wolves howled at odd angles as if the sound had been bent by magic. We crossed hills with runestones standing like sleeping giants. Every place we passed felt like it was listening for my breath. Halfway to the Alpha King's lands, the wagon jolted. My body slammed into the wood. A scream tore from someone in the back. Then I heard it, an animal sound so low it belonged to the earth, a beast's growl. My captors froze. The driver shouted something about bandits, but bandits don't move like that. Bandits don't wait silently at the edge of the road with the moonlight turning their shadows into claws. The wagon door opened. A figure stepped close, too still to be human in the way people pretend to be. His presence gathered the night around him. I learned his title before anyone explained it. The rider was the Alpha King. Cale Werngard. When he looked at me, his eyes didn't spark with pity. They didn't soften with cruelty. They sharpened. And his beast, the thing people whispered about like a storm you could maybe outrun, seemed to recognize something in my blood. Because the air changed, my skin prickled, my scar warmed. I didn't understand then. I only knew it felt like being seen by something older than judgment. "My prisoners," one guard began, trying to reclaim authority. Cale didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I didn't ask for your story," he said. His wolves, his pack, flowed into the road like shadows learning their purpose. One circled the wagon, muzzle close to my lap as if scenting the truth. Another stood on the opposite side, eyes flicking toward my captors with quiet, dangerous disapproval. They didn't rush. They watched. Cale's gaze stayed locked on me. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't just powerful, he was hungry for answers. But I wasn't a snack. I wasn't a thing to be taken. So when they tried to pull me out again, I stepped back on my own. My feet found the ground before their hands could guide me. "I didn't do it," I said. My voice didn't shake the way it had in the hall. I spoke like a person who'd been erased and decided she would reappear. Cale's head tilted slightly. His pack went even quieter, as if my words had aligned with something deeper. The guards swallowed. One looked at Mara's wax-sealed letter someone had brought, still clutched in a gloved hand. Cale didn't care about paper. He cared about what breathed. He moved closer, slow enough that I could count every heartbeat. "Who taught you to lie like that?" he asked. I almost snapped, not because of his words, but because of the way his beast reacted, how the wolves shifted, how the forest seemed to lean in. His beast didn't like the question. It liked me refusing to be shoved into a box. "I learned from people like you," I answered before I could stop myself. The sentence left my mouth and my stomach dropped. Courtiers always feared the Alpha King's temper. I'd heard the rumors, wolves that tore throats, men who never returned from his dungeons. But Cale didn't explode. He looked almost curious. Then he lifted a hand. His wolf stepped forward, placing its head near my side. Its breath was warm. Its eyes, dark and knowing, stayed on mine. The world narrowed to that gaze. The guard holding the letter hesitated. Cale's command came like a lock snapping shut. "Bring her," he ordered. Not to punish, not to execute, just bring her. As if I was part of something he needed. They didn't drag me this time. They walked with me like I belonged in the next chapter of a story they hadn't written. The Alpha King's keep rose ahead like a fortress made of old vows. Stone walls wrapped around it in spirals. Lanterns burned with a blue flame that didn't flicker with wind. The air smelled like iron, cedar, and something faintly sweet, like rain over earth. Inside, everything moved with purpose. Guards took one glance and stopped speaking. Servants tightened their grip on trays as I passed, but they didn't stare with pity. They stared with recognition. Not for my face, for my defiance. Cale's beast form was legend, a dominant silhouette in battle tales, a terror in old songs. Yet the hallways I walked through felt tamed, like something wild had learned restraint. A guard led me toward the throne chamber. The court gathered there like a storm cloud holding its breath. I'd expected chains. I'd expected a dungeon. Instead, I found marble floors polished to a mirror sheen, and a throne carved with spirals that looked like vines or claws, depending on how the torchlight hit. Kale sat in the center of it all, but he didn't loom the way men do when they want you to fear them. He sat like a predator, pretending to be calm. When I stepped into the chamber, the entire place tightened. My feet slowed without permission. I could feel wolves behind doors, watching through more than windows. I could feel the magic threaded into the stone, thin at first, then thick as my breath got quicker. Kale's eyes found me. The court went still. He stood when I reached the midpoint, and even the air seemed to straighten. The accusations were repeated, version after version, each one more polished, more final. Officials pointed at me like they needed their fear to sound official. I listened until I couldn't, until it wasn't just my name on the line. It was my ability to refuse being defined. I looked directly at the people who wanted silence. Then I looked at Kale, not like a supplicant, like a woman with a spine. "I didn't poison anyone," I said. A duke, someone with rings too heavy for their own wrists, laughed, not kindly. "Prove it," he demanded. My hands lifted slowly. Not a weapon, evidence. I reached into the pouch tied at my waist and pulled out a bundle of dried marigold and a small vial of oil I'd begged to keep. Not because it would save me, because it would show them I remembered how to help. "Your daughter's fever didn't start from poison," I said, voice steady. "It started from an infection that came from the wrong water. Someone cleaned the kennel with lye and hid the smell by burning herbs. The herbs mask pain. They don't fix it." Gasps snapped around the hall. A servant swore softly. Mara wasn't in the chamber, but her presence was there anyway, in the way people flinched at the mention of water, in the way one official's expression turned too quick, too practiced. Kale didn't look away. I had expected him to demand silence. I had expected him to treat my words as insolence. Instead, his wolves shifted like they were learning a new song. Then he spoke. "Why would you know that?" Kale asked. It wasn't a threat. It was a test. My scar warmed again. The crescent mark pulsed like it remembered something my mind still denied. I swallowed. Because the truth wasn't just knowledge. The truth was power. "I learned how sickness spreads," I answered. "I learned how people hide it. I learned how to stop believing those who benefit from your fear." The court waited for me to break. I didn't. I took a breath and kept going. "And if the charm is missing," I said, "it wasn't stolen from me. It was placed there." The entire chamber fell mute, not just quiet, silent, like the walls had swallowed sound. Even Kale's pack held still. His beast reacted with a subtle shift I couldn't ignore. The way his shadows seemed to pull closer, the way the air grew charged. For one shocking moment, I thought he might believe me. Then the court's silence cracked in the most dangerous way. Kale's eyes narrowed, his gaze sharpened, assessing. His voice came low. "Stand here," he ordered. It sounded like command. It felt like choice. As attendants guided me to the edge of the throne's shadow, I realized something else. They weren't ready to let him decide. They were waiting to see whether he'd punish me for humiliating the court in public, or whether he'd pretend he hadn't noticed the silence. Kale did neither. He turned his head slightly. To his right, a gate opened and a pack member stepped forward, one of the old veteran wolves, enormous and scarred, with eyes like frost. "The old veteran," someone whispered. Kale's order was simple. "Find the charm. Find the truth. If she lies, bury her in the river reeds. If she tells it, bring it to my desk." Desk. Not throne. Not dungeon. The court reeled as if he'd swapped punishments for paperwork. I almost laughed. Almost cried. Because the world had tried to erase me, and Kale had just allowed me to exist long enough for a correction. The old veteran departed with a team. The rest of the court scattered like insects who didn't want to be caught in the same light as my defiance. Kale didn't dismiss me immediately. He lingered. Then he looked me over as if memorizing the details he'd missed. "Servant," he said, and the word tasted like dismissal. But my chest didn't tighten the way it once would have. "Get food," Kale ordered his attendants. "Warm tea, herbs, and something to mend." Mend. Me. My ribs ached from the wagon and the guards' rough hands, but I'd never told them how painful my body was. Kale's beast must have smelled it. His wolves must have noticed. Because they moved with speed I hadn't been granted in any other place. When I was left alone in a corridor lined with tapestries, I sat on the stone and pressed my palm to the crescent scar near my collarbone. Heat spread. Not fever heat. Recognition. A low hum, so faint I thought it was my own heartbeat, rose in my throat. I didn't know it would happen until the sound came. A note, steady and old. It made the candle flames in the corridor tilt toward me. I went still. "Idiot," I whispered to myself. "Stop doing strange things." But the hum didn't stop. My power wasn't fighting. It was listening. It was coaxing living things into telling the truth. I lifted the palm that hovered over my scar and felt the vibrations in the air. The keep's walls seemed to breathe in response. That's when I realized what Mara had meant. The beast in you. Maybe it wasn't a curse. Maybe it was a key. When the old veteran returned, it wasn't with the charm. It was with questions. He brought a handful of evidence, burnt herb bundles with lye residue, a wet ledger showing who ordered kennel supplies, and a vial taken from a locked storage chest that smelled like something bitterly sweet. Kale held the vial up to the torchlight. The liquid shimmered with a faint shimmer that didn't behave like normal poison. It looked alive. The old veteran's voice rumbled. "She's telling it right," he said. "But the charm wasn't hers. Someone planted it. Someone who knew where her satchel would be searched." Kale's gaze turned toward me, not accusing, studying, like a predator evaluating whether prey will run or bite back. I stood slowly. "Where is Mara?" I asked. The chamber chilled. A few wolves shifted like they didn't like my mention of her. Kale didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer. His shadow stretched over mine. I didn't move away. I'd been cast out once. I wasn't going to flinch again just because a king's presence felt like a storm. Kale reached out. He didn't touch my face. He touched the air near my scar, as if checking temperature. His beast reacted, fur rippling along the edge of his form, not fully present, but near enough that I felt my skin crawl. "Hidden powers," Kale said quietly, like he'd just discovered a new language. The court wasn't empty anymore. It returned the moment he spoke, hungry for drama. But when they saw how Kale didn't look at me like an accused criminal, their expressions changed. Not admiration, fear. Because belief is contagious, and the court hated anything that threatened their chosen lies. Kale's next command was for the keep itself. "Bring her to the infirmary," he told the attendants. "Not jail, not chains, infirmary." I should have been grateful. Instead, I suspected the trap, because Kale was still Kale. A king whose beast had survived years of dominance, a man who could erase me with a word. If I went with him, I'd be under his rules. And I didn't know yet whether his rules were safety or a slower kind of captivity. So I did what I'd done in the hall. I chose myself. "I'm going to walk," I said. A guard started to reach. Kale lifted one hand. The guard froze. His pack went still again. Kale watched me as if waiting to see whether I'd collapse on my own. I walked, step by step. The infirmary smelled of clean linen and bitter herbs. A healer approached, an older woman with steady hands, and bowed slightly. "You're the one they brought from the West Court," she said. I nodded. "Then you're in pain," she continued. I didn't argue. Instead, I reached for the cloth bundle I carried with me, my own modest kit, saved from my cell, and offered it without ceremony. "Clean the wound," I told her. The healer blinked. No one talked to healers like that in my old life. People begged, people bowed, people pretended they didn't know their own needs. But I'd never been weak, just misread. The healer's gaze slid to my scar. "Your body," she began. "It responds to truth," I said, and the words surprised me as much as them. The healer didn't laugh. She studied. Then she nodded once. While my ribs were cleaned and bound, I hummed under my breath, not to summon spectacle, but because the sound helped my body stop fighting itself. The hum settled my pulse. It stopped the tremor. The healer's hands moved faster. "Where did you learn that?" she asked. I didn't answer immediately. I didn't want to say, "From something I haven't named yet," so I gave the closest truth. "I listened," I said. "The night after I was tended, Cale came to the infirmary. I didn't hear him enter. I only noticed when the candles didn't flicker anymore. The room's air thickened with his presence. Cale stood in the doorway watching me sit up straighter, already dressed, already composed. My hum had stopped because I'd stopped needing it, but my scar still felt warm, alive. Cale looked at it, then at me. "What did you do?" he asked, as if the infirmary itself had offended him. "I healed," I answered. He didn't like the simplicity. His beast prowled in the quiet between words. "I'm not asking about your hands," he said. I met his gaze. I didn't flinch. "I told the truth," I replied. Something shifted behind his eyes. The old veteran stood a few paces back, arms crossed, watching like he'd seen kings wobble before. "Your beast hates liars," the old veteran rumbled. Cale's jaw tightened. I watched his wolves instead. They weren't circling now. They were waiting, as if they were choosing whether to trust me, as if trust mattered. Cale stepped forward until the edge of his shadow touched the bed frame. I didn't move away, but my breath caught. I could smell cedar and smoke on him, like a battle that had already ended. He studied me for a long moment. Then he said, "If Mara planted that charm, she will come for you. She won't want you alive to witness anything." The words were not comforting, but they were honest. "Then she'll have to fight through wolves," I said. The healer gasped softly, but I didn't mean it as challenge. I meant it as logic. I wasn't defenseless, not anymore. Cale's eyes narrowed. His beast seemed to lean closer. It wanted me either fearless or obedient. I wasn't sure which one. "I won't be locked in here," I added. "If you want the truth found, let me help." His gaze sharpened. The old veteran's mouth twitched like he was trying not to smile. Cale didn't give an answer. Instead, he turned and walked out. When the door closed, I exhaled. I should have felt fear. Instead, I felt the strange relief of being treated like someone with purpose. 2 days later, Mara came. Not at the front gate, not with guards. She came like rot in the walls, quiet, patient, inevitable. One of the servants brought me a basket of linen and bread with a look that said, "Don't trust kindness from people you don't know." The basket smelled faintly sweet. I frowned. When I leaned closer, I recognized the scent beneath the bread. Bitter honey. The vial from the ledger. I didn't eat. I didn't confront. I used my hands. I tore a strip of cloth and pressed it to the underside of the basket's lid. The cloth darkened. Poison soaked through. Someone had tried to kill me with something sweet and familiar, something meant to feel safe. Anger flared through my chest. Not the kind that makes you swing fists, the kind that makes you plan. I hummed the smallest note I could manage and held the cloth up toward the infirmary window. A faint ripple moved across the glass, like the keep itself acknowledged my power. Hours later, Cale found me standing over the ruined basket. He didn't ask whether I was hurt. He looked at the cloth, then at Mara's hidden poison. His wolves gathered behind him, eyes bright. No one spoke. The air felt charged enough to burn. Finally, Cale's voice came low. "So she tried." I didn't answer the question he didn't ask. I offered him something else. "Someone planted the charm," I said. "Someone moved it through the kennel storage. They needed access. Mara's circle isn't just at the court, it's here too." Cale's gaze cut to mine. His beast reacted, fur along the edge of his presence rising like the edge of a storm. He studied me, as if weighing whether I was clever or dangerous. I didn't lower my chin. "I'm not the villain," I said, "but I'm not helpless either." Cale stepped closer. I saw the faint fang-mark scar on his knuckle catch torchlight. He held out his hand, not to touch me, to offer a choice. "Show me," he said. My pulse jumped. This wasn't the command I'd expected. This was forced proximity, yes, but it wasn't captivity. It was a slow, dangerous permission. So I led him toward the kennel storage. We moved through corridors while wolves walked as silent escorts. Kale's pack didn't treat me like an intruder anymore. They treated me like a question that mattered. At the storage door, I paused. My scar warmed again. The hum rose in my throat like a tide. I didn't sing loudly. I didn't perform. I listened. To the air. To the walls. To the living things hidden behind stone. Then I realized it. There was a rhythm in the sense, a repeating pattern. Someone had stored something recently, and it had been opened and closed with care. "Here," I said. Kale's eyes flicked to where I pointed. A loose plank, a gap behind it. He didn't order anyone to tear it apart. He knelt, slow and controlled, and lifted the plank with his hand. Under it sat a small leather pouch. The charm was inside, but it wasn't alone. There was a second item, wrapped in cloth soaked with that same bitter honey, a vial meant to poison a wolf, to make the pack blame me, to make Kale's beast act rashly, to turn him against the very woman he'd started to tolerate. I stared at the vial and felt my stomach twist. Mara didn't just want me dead, she wanted the king's world to fracture. Kale's jaw clenched, the room cooled, his wolves snarled without sound. But Kale didn't explode. He placed the vial into my hands carefully, like he was letting me carry the weight of the truth. "This is proof," I said. "Yes," Kale agreed. Then he looked at me in a way that made the air thicken. "If you can find where she hid this," he continued, "you can also find what she's planning next." There it was, the choice. Kale wasn't just protecting me, he was using me, yes, but slowly, respectfully. Like he was learning that my power wasn't a weapon meant for war, it was a key meant for survival. 2 nights later, Mara attempted her final trap. She didn't come alone. She brought guards from her old court, pretending they were allies. She brought a ritual seer who carried salt and ash and a trembling hand. She brought a story ready to be believed. When she entered the Great Hall, her smile was sharp enough to draw blood. She called me by the name she'd used in the accusation. She made sure the court heard it. She spoke about curses and weakness, about how the king should be wary of servants with hidden beasts. The seer raised a hand and whispered a chant. Then the hall's candles went blue. The air smelled like burnt paper and smoke. A barrier shimmered across the room, sealing exits. My lungs tightened. This wasn't an arrest. It was a ritual. A slow burn of fear meant to make my power look like threat. Mara turned her gaze on Kale. "Your beast will ruin you," she said softly. Kale's pack stiffened. The old veteran stepped forward slightly, but Kale didn't move. He only looked at me. And it wasn't pity. It wasn't anger. It was attention. Like he was waiting to see whether I would survive without becoming what they wanted. My hands trembled, not with weakness, but with the strain of sensing the barrier's pulse. My scar heated as if it recognized the ritual's language. Mara smiled again. She thought the court would watch me break. She thought Kale would punish me for humiliating him, but I'd already learned. The court watched. It never believed until it saw proof. So I gave them something ordinary. I moved to the center of the hall. I didn't argue with Mara. I didn't scream curses back. I knelt by the ritual circle and began to clean the spilled salt. The seer hissed, "Stop!" No one else moved. Everyone stared as I gathered the salt into cloth and set it aside. My hum rose, low and steady. The barrier flickered. Wolves shifted, uneasy. Because the barrier wasn't just magic. It was based on a lie. It depended on me being afraid. My humming wasn't a spell to conquer. It was a negotiation with living energy, a reminder that truth didn't need permission. Kale watched silently. His beast pressed closer. I felt the pressure in the air like a wave about to crash. Then, like the world finally decided to stop lying, the barrier cracked. A gust of cold air hit my face. The blue flames died. The seer stumbled, eyes wide. Mara's composure faltered for the first time. The court's silence transformed into stunned breath, because a servant shouldn't have undone a ritual without violence. Yet I had. I stood slowly, salt cloth in my hands. "I'm not cursed," I told them. "I'm trained." The court recoiled, not from my words, from the realization that they'd underestimated the person they discarded. Mara's eyes flashed. She tried to speak another lie, but Kale moved, not toward me, toward her. His presence filled the space, and his wolves ringed Mara like a cage made of breath and teeth. Mara's smile cracked fully now. "What is she doing?" the seer stammered. Kale didn't answer. He simply ordered his pack to pull the ritual supplies, salt, ash, and vials, into the light. Mara's guards looked helpless. The evidence was right there. Bitter honey residue, hidden charms, a vial meant to poison a wolf. When the old veteran produced the ledger that matched the purchased herbs, Mara finally went pale. Kale's eyes remained on her, but his beast's attention kept flicking back to me. As if his beast was waiting for my reaction, waiting for whether I'd savor the victory, or if I'd become something else. I didn't savor. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile cruelly. I only exhaled. My body started to shake again, but differently now. Not fear. Aftershock. All the strain I'd held in my bones finally loosened. Kale's gaze snapped to me. His pack moved instantly, circling me with careful protection rather than intimidation. He stepped forward, and this time he touched me. His fingers brushed my scar, gentle enough that it didn't feel like a claim, more like a check, like he was confirming I was real. "Don't do that again alone," he said. I stared up at him. The words should have sounded like control. They sounded like concern. I hated how much it mattered. Because concern from a king is dangerous. It means you're becoming important. It means you're becoming attached. And attachment is how you get destroyed. So I stepped back a fraction. "I don't belong to you," I said, voice firm. The court held its breath. Mara's guards whispered prayers. Kale's beast shifted like a tide pulling under ice. But Kale didn't crush me. He didn't command me like a thing. He only nodded once, slow, controlled. "Good," he said. Then he lifted his chin toward the old veteran. "Let her stay in the infirmary suite," Kale ordered. "Not as prisoner, as healer." He paused, then added, "And watch her. Not because she can't defend herself, because she shouldn't have to." The court murmured. Some looked angry, some looked relieved, some looked jealous, because a king choosing protection over punishment was unsettling. And because protecting a woman with hidden powers meant the king might be changing. It meant his beast might be learning kindness. It meant the realm's oldest fear, loss of dominance, might finally be challenged. I wanted to believe it didn't affect me, but when I returned to the infirmary suite that night, Kale's pack sat outside the door as if keeping watch was a vow. When I hummed softly to ease my nerves, the wolves quieted instead of growling. When I washed cloth with careful hands, the water didn't turn muddy, as if the keep itself wanted me to succeed. I started to understand something painful. His beast form had been dominant for years, which meant it had been alone for years. No one dared to bridge the space between predator and person. Not until me. Not until I arrived with my ordinary strength. Not until my defiance split the court's silence and made even Kale's beast listen. Over the following weeks, I stayed close enough to learn his realm, far enough to preserve my pride. I tended wounded pack members. I brewed herb tea for guards with trembling hands. I cleaned Kale's damaged cloak when the fabric snagged against iron chains meant for training. I did these things without asking for permission, and each time his walls lowered another fraction. At first, he watched from a distance. Then he asked questions he didn't bother asking anyone else. Finally, he started coming closer, walking the infirmary halls at night like he needed the sound of my humming to ground himself. I pretended I didn't notice. I pretended I wasn't affected. But one morning, the old veteran approached me with a grim expression. "There's talk," he rumbled, "about why his beast reacts to you." My fingers tightened around a mortar as I crushed dried flowers. "What talk?" I asked. He glanced toward the throne hall. "They say you were meant for him," he admitted. "Not in a romantic way, in a prophecy way." Prophecy. I'd heard enough of those to know they were always written by someone who expected you to obey. "Don't tell me prophecies," I said. "Tell me facts." The old veteran exhaled. "Facts," he agreed. "Your scar reacted to warding magic meant to bind Kale's beast. Your hum disrupted a barrier. And that vial, it wasn't just meant to kill you, it was meant to weaken his pack's trust." My breath caught. So Mara's betrayal wasn't only personal, it was strategic. Someone wanted Kale isolated, someone wanted him to choose the wrong threat, someone wanted his beast to turn its hunger into destruction. Kale's beast had stayed dominant for years because it didn't have an anchor. I was becoming that anchor without meaning to, without asking, without warning. That realization made my throat burn, not with weakness, with the fear of being essential. Essential people get killed. Then a new incident shattered the calm. A storm rolled in faster than forecast, dragging black clouds that swallowed sunlight. Wolves at the outer fence howled in panic. Kale's pack gathered in the courtyard. I ran toward the noise, not thinking about consequences. That was the moment I truly stopped being passive. I followed my instincts. At the fence, I found a group of disguised attackers, men who wore the old court's colors and carried vials identical to the poison Mara had used. They weren't bandits. They weren't random. They were contractors of betrayal. I should have called Kale, but I didn't. I dropped to my knees beside the injured wolf at the fence, one of his sentries, a young female with blood seeping between fur. My hands moved before my fear could. I cleaned the wound. I pressed a salve made to pull venom from muscle. I hummed through my teeth, quiet and steady. The wolf's pulse slowed. Behind me, someone gasped. Kale's silhouette appeared at the edge of the courtyard, moving fast in a way that made the air tremble. His pack parted. Kale's eyes found me kneeling. His beast surged. I could feel it, but his rage didn't turn outward to destroy me or the wolf. It turned outward to sever the attacker's attempt. The fight didn't require me to swing a sword. I only had to keep the wolf breathing long enough for his wolves to arrive. When the attackers fled, Kale moved behind me and pressed his palm gently to my shoulder. His touch didn't feel like ownership. It felt like grounding. "Stand," he ordered. I didn't want to, because the wolf was still fragile. But I did stand, slowly, wiping blood from my palms and refusing to look away from Kale. "Your people were hurt," I said. Kale's jaw tightened. Then he glanced at his wolves. Not a command, an instruction. "Take her to the infirmary," he said. His pack complied with reverence. When we returned inside, the injured wolf rested. I stayed by her bed. Kale stayed by the doorway at first. Then, quietly, he sat on the floor at my side like his beast had finally learned what patience felt like. I stared at him. His eyes were still hard, but his presence wasn't a threat. It was a shelter. "Why didn't you run?" he asked. I could have given him a dozen answers. Instead, I gave him the simplest one. "I didn't know how to abandon someone in pain," I said. Kale didn't speak, but the pack's silence changed again, from watchfulness to something warmer, something that felt like trust. Then came the twist that none of us expected. Mara wasn't only plotting against me, she'd planned for me to survive, just barely, so she could control the narrative, so she could trigger the next stage of her ritual during my recovery, because the poison wasn't the final weapon, it was the test. The seer returned in the night, disguised as a traveling healer, slipping into the infirmary with a bag of clean linen and a smile full of false gentleness. I recognized her immediately by her hands, the way her fingers moved too carefully, too rehearsed. Not like someone who tended wounds, like someone who staged them. My scar warmed violently. The hum rose without permission. The air around me rippled. Kale noticed instantly. He was awake before the seer even set her bag down. Kale stepped forward, pulling his pack's attention into one focused beam. The disguised seer tried to speak a convincing lie, but my hum cut through it. It sounded like a warning a wolf would understand. The seer stumbled back, eyes widening. "You can't," she whispered. I walked toward her slowly, hands open. Not a threat, a recovery of agency. "You don't get to use my power as a weapon," I said. Kale's beast surged at my tone, not because it was aggressive, because it was mine to choose. The seer tried to activate a last charm hidden in her sleeve. Kale moved like a storm. He didn't hurt me. He stopped the charm mid-air with a controlled hand, anger kept on a leash. He turned to me. "For someone they called cursed," he said, voice low, "you keep saving lives." I swallowed. The night felt too bright, too honest. I could no longer pretend this was just protection. My heart, my stubborn heart, wanted to believe in the quiet decision his beast made every time it chose not to break me. But belief is a risk. I'd been betrayed. I'd been framed. I'd been cast out. So I pulled back. "I'm not your mate," I told him. I said it to protect myself. I said it to keep him from deciding I belonged to him. The hall went still. His pack stiffened again. Kale's beast reacted with a low, dangerous sound. His eyes darkened. I expected punishment. Instead, he lowered his head slightly, as if the beast had accepted a boundary. Then he took my hands gently and held them like I was something precious and breakable, not like a possession. "You're right," Kale said. "Not until you choose it." My breath caught. The words didn't fix the past, but they offered a future. A future where I wasn't forced into a story someone else wrote. A future where my agency mattered. In the days that followed, Mara was hunted down by the old veteran and Kale's pack. Her traps were found, her ledger exposed, her seer network dismantled. Mara begged at last, begged like she'd never watched me beg in a stone cell. Kale never gave me the satisfaction of revenge. He offered me something better. Closure. When the last of the poison was removed from the keep's wards, my scar finally cooled. The hum stopped fading in and out. It settled into a steady rhythm inside me, like a heartbeat I owned. One morning, Kale came to the infirmary suite while I prepared bandages. The light through the window fell across his face in gold stripes. His beast form pressed in the shadows, restless. He looked at me as if he was deciding something. Then he sat across from me. "Tell me the truth now," he said. My hands paused. "What truth?" "The one you've been hiding," Kale replied. "Not about Mara, about you." I stared at the bandage cloth, because I'd been telling myself I didn't need anyone. Because I'd been treating my power like a curse meant to scare me away from love. Because I'd been terrified that if Kale truly saw me, he'd see the parts I didn't know how to fix. But healing had already started. It had started the moment I stopped begging. It had started when I hummed through pain and didn't let anyone else decide what my body meant. So I lifted my gaze. "I don't know what I am," I admitted, "but I know what I choose." Kale's pack shifted, listening. His beast held still. "What do you choose?" he asked. I took a breath. Then I let the answer land. "I choose a life where I'm not disposable," I said. "I choose to be believed. And if your beast reacts to truth like it reacts to my hum, then I choose to walk beside you while we learn how to be real together." Kale's eyes softened a fraction, not like a confession, like a door opening. He stood slowly and offered his hand. This time, I didn't hesitate. I took it. His warmth wrapped around mine. His beast surged, then settled, as if relieved to finally have an anchor it could trust. And in that moment, the shock wasn't that Kale wanted me. It was that my heart responded without breaking. Because I wasn't being claimed. I was being chosen. In the throne room, weeks later, when the realm's nobles gathered to watch for punishment or forgiveness, Kale didn't hide behind dominance. He stood with his pack flanking me like guardians, not servants. The court wanted to see a scandal. They wanted to see a woman kneel. Instead, I stood tall. I didn't mock my past. I didn't erase my pain. I only let them witness what I'd become. A healer who refused lies. a woman with hidden powers that worked through truth, and beside the Alpha King, with his beast calmer than it had ever been, I felt the realm's fear shift into respect. The bond wasn't a chain, it was a vow. His walls came down slowly, one hum, one bandage, one protected heartbeat at a time. And when Kale finally lowered his forehead to mine in a quiet, wordless promise, I understood the final twist of my exile. I hadn't been cast out by fate. I'd been brought here by something deeper, something that wanted me safe enough to choose my destiny. And I did.